She looked at me for a long moment, then smiled, the kind of smile that said she'd just noticed I wasn't a kid anymore. I pulled into my aunt's driveway just as the late afternoon sun turned the whole street gold. It had been months since I'd been here. College, work, and life had all kept me away. This house had always been my second home, a place of warmth and quiet comfort, where weekends meant good food and familiar voices. I was expecting exactly that, comfort. What I wasn't expecting was her. I heard laughter from the kitchen as I came in, the kind that instantly makes you smile even before you know why. My aunt's voice floated over first, then another voice, lower, smoother, with a warmth that made my steps slow without me realizing. She was at the table when I stepped in, my aunt's best friend. I'd known her since I was a kid, though always from the safe distance of family gatherings. She'd been the cool adult back then, the one who asked about school, who brought little gifts from her travels, who always remembered my birthday. But now I noticed other things. Her hair was pulled back in a loose twist, but a few strands had slipped free to frame her face. She wore a soft cream blouse tucked into relaxed trousers, and somehow she looked both casual and impossibly put together. Her eyes lit up the moment she saw me. "Well, look at you," she said, standing and coming closer. Her arms went around me in a warm, easy hug, the kind that wasn't rushed, that let me breathe her in for a moment. She smelled faintly of tea and something floral, like fresh jasmine. "You've grown up," she said with a quiet smile as she stepped back. Her hand rested on my forearm a second longer than necessary before she let go. It was a small thing, maybe nothing, but I felt it. The kitchen was full of comfortable chaos, a pot simmering on the stove, my aunt pouring wine, someone setting out plates. But my attention kept drifting back to her. She sat back down, one ankle crossed over the other, listening with that quiet attentiveness that always made you feel like your words mattered. I found myself watching how she smiled when my aunt said something funny, the way she tilted her head slightly when she listened, how her fingers traced the rim of her teacup absent-mindedly. Dinner would come soon. Conversation would fill the house. But in that first moment, I already knew something was different. The memory of her hug stayed with me, the soft press of her shoulder against my chest, the faint warmth she left on my sleeve. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a thought I hadn't expected, she wasn't just my aunt's friend anymore. Dinner was easy, familiar, the kind of meal where everyone talks over each other, stories overlap, and laughter seems to hang in the air like steam from the food. I joined in, but every now and then, my eyes would drift to her across the table. She laughed softly at something my aunt said, leaning back just slightly, her hand brushing her collarbone as if to contain her amusement. When she glanced my way, just for a second, I felt caught, like she knew I'd been watching. Later, when plates were cleared and my aunt disappeared into the kitchen, I slipped out to the back porch. The evening air was cooler than I expected, a soft breeze carrying the faint smell of rain even though the sky was still clear. A moment later, the door creaked open behind me. "You looked like you needed rescuing," she said gently, stepping out with 2 mugs of tea. I smiled and took the one she offered. The mug was warm in my hands, the ceramic smooth and grounding. "Thanks. It's a lot of noise in there." "It always is," she said, settling into the chair beside mine. "But it's good noise. Happy noise." For a while, we just sat there, listening to the crickets and the occasional clink of dishes from the kitchen. The porch light above us threw a soft circle of gold that didn't quite reach the edges of the yard. Moths danced lazily near the bulb, their wings catching the light like pale paper. She asked me about work, about where I was living now. I told her about my new apartment, about the strange freedom of having my own space, but also the quiet that sometimes felt too big. She listened the way she always had, head slightly tilted, hands wrapped around her mug. When she spoke about her own life, it was with a kind of calm clarity I admired. She mentioned a project she'd just finished, how proud she was of it, but how exhausted it had left her. There was something in her tone, not regret exactly, but a tired honesty, that made me want to know more. "You always seem so put together," I said before I could stop myself. She turned to look at me, eyebrows slightly raised. "Do I?" "Yeah, you always have," I admitted. She smiled faintly, but there was something thoughtful in it too. "Well, that's nice to hear." The silence after that wasn't awkward, just quiet, almost heavy. The night air had cooled enough that I could see the faintest curl of steam rising from my tea, and still, I didn't want to move. When my aunt called us back inside a few minutes later, I realized I'd barely touched my drink, but I'd memorized the sound of her voice, low and warm, against the backdrop of the night. After dinner, the house fell into that comfortable rhythm of everyone helping in small ways, dishes clinking, drawers opening and shutting, soft conversation. My aunt turned on some quiet music in the background, humming along as she stacked plates. I carried a few dishes into the kitchen, setting them near the sink. She was already there, sleeves rolled slightly, rinsing glasses under the tap. The soft kitchen light seemed to soften her face, catching in the strands of hair that had slipped free earlier. "You don't have to help," I said, reaching for a towel anyway. She gave me a look over her shoulder, amused, but approving. "Of course you do. You used to sneak out of dish duty when you were 12. I laughed, leaning against the counter. "Guilty." She turned back to what she was doing, but I saw the corner of her mouth curve. "I remember," she said. "You'd grab a cookie and disappear into the backyard like you were on the run from the law." The memory made me grin. In my defense, they were really good cookies. Her laugh this time was softer, closer to herself. She reached past me for a plate, and for a brief moment, her arm brushed mine. It was nothing, a casual touch, but I felt the warmth of it linger longer than it should have. "You know," she said after a beat, glancing at me as she wiped her hands on a towel, "it's strange seeing you like this." "Like what?" She stepped a little closer, still holding the towel loosely in her hands. Her eyes studied my face in a way that felt almost too direct. "Like this," she repeated quietly. "Not a kid running through the house. Not my friend's nephew sneaking cookies. Just you." The words hung between us, heavier than I expected. "You're not a kid anymore," she said, her voice softer this time, almost thoughtful. Something about the way she said it made me straighten a little, as if I wanted to prove her right. Then, almost without thinking, she reached out and brushed a crumb from my shoulder. The touch was light, her fingertips barely grazing me, but it sent a strange current through me all the same. "There," she said, as if that small gesture had been the entire point. But she didn't move away immediately. Instead, she lingered just long enough for me to notice the faint scent of her perfume again, clean, floral, a little sharp, before stepping back with a small, quiet smile. "Come on," she said, voice returning to its usual brightness. "Let's finish up before your aunt notices we're taking too long." And just like that, the moment was over, but it stayed with me, playing back in my mind even as we loaded the last dish and turned out the kitchen light. The house had gone quiet after everyone turned in for the night. I couldn't sleep yet, too wired from the day, from her words in the kitchen still circling my head like moths around a porch light. I stepped outside, barefoot, the porch boards cool under my feet. The night had deepened. The air smelled faintly of wet earth, like rain was somewhere nearby, and the crickets were louder now, filling the space where conversation used to be. I didn't expect to see her there. She was sitting on the porch steps, elbows resting loosely on her knees, her hair down now so it framed her face in soft waves. The glow from the porch light barely reached her, just enough to catch the curve of her cheek. "You're still awake?" I asked quietly. She turned her head toward me, not startled, just calm, as if she'd been expecting someone. "Couldn't sleep," she said simply. Then she patted the step beside her. "Come sit." I lowered myself next to her, close enough to feel the heat radiating faintly from her body, though we weren't touching. For a while, we just sat there in silence, watching the shadows move in the yard. "Finally," she said, "it's funny. This house hasn't changed much over the years, but I have." I glanced at her. There was something in her voice, not sad exactly, but thoughtful, a little wistful. "I was thinking tonight about how quickly time passes," she continued, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. "Feels like I blinked, and suddenly all you kids grew up. And me? I'm still trying to figure some things out." Something about her honesty made me want to match it. "I used to look up to you," I admitted. "You were always the one who treated me like I wasn't just some annoying kid underfoot. You made me feel seen." She turned her head to look at me, her expression softening. "You were easy to see," she said gently. The words caught me off guard. Simple, but they landed deep. After a moment, she reached out, almost absently, and rested her hand on my knee. It wasn't a romantic gesture. Not exactly. but it was steady, grounding, like she wanted me to feel her presence. "Thank you for saying that," she murmured. "Tonight, I just needed to, I don't know, talk to someone who would actually listen." I nodded, not trusting myself to say anything. Her hand stayed there for another second, warm through the thin fabric of my jeans, before she slowly withdrew it and wrapped her arms loosely around herself. The quiet between us didn't feel empty. It felt full, heavy with things neither of us had said yet. When I finally stood to go back inside, I glanced at her once more, and she was still looking out at the yard, her profile lit softly by the porch light, as if she, too, wasn't quite ready for the night to end. I was halfway to standing when she finally looked at me again. There was something unspoken in her gaze, something that made me pause, my hand resting on the porch railing as if waiting for permission to leave. "You know," she said softly, "it really is strange seeing you like this. Grown. Different." The words felt heavier this time, not just casual observation, but acknowledgement. I could hear the crickets, the distant hum of a car on the road beyond the house, but out here it felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of us. I managed a quiet, almost joking, "Guess I finally caught up." She smiled, but it was small, thoughtful. Then she stood slowly, brushing her hands over her pants as if to shake off her own hesitation. When she stepped toward me, I didn't move back. She stopped close enough that I could see the fine lines around her eyes, the way the porch light softened her hair into a faint halo. "You're really not a kid anymore," she said again, this time with a faint catch in her voice, like she was letting the truth settle for herself as much as for me. I didn't know what to say. I didn't think there was anything to say. And then she reached out. It was a simple touch, her fingers closing gently around my wrist, but it was deliberate. She guided me toward her, so that we were standing face to face, just a breath apart. For a moment, we didn't move. I could feel the faint heat of her body, the cool night air against the back of my neck, the quickened thud of my own pulse. Then she pulled me closer, not abruptly, but slowly, almost cautiously, until her arms were around me. Her cheek came to rest against my shoulder, her hands settling at the small of my back. The hug wasn't quick, it was lingering, as if she wanted me to feel the weight and warmth of it fully. I let my arms go around her, hesitant at first, then more sure. The fabric of her blouse was soft under my fingers, and I could feel the steady rise and fall of her breathing. We stayed like that for what felt like a long time, long enough for me to notice the faint scent of her shampoo, the way a strand of her hair brushed against my jaw, the way the world felt impossibly still. When she finally let go, she stepped back only a little, her hands still on my arms. Her expression was unreadable for a second, then softened into a small, almost sad smile. "Good night," she said quietly. I could only nod. As I went back inside, I was aware of every inch of me she'd touched, the lingering warmth where her hands had been, as if I'd just crossed some invisible line, and there was no going back. I woke earlier than usual, as if my mind had refused to let me drift too far from the night before. For a few moments, I just lay there on the couch, staring at the ceiling, feeling the faint echo of her arms around me, the warmth still strangely present, like the memory itself had weight. The house was quiet except for the faint rattle of pans somewhere in the kitchen. I pulled on a sweatshirt and padded down the hallway, my steps slow, hesitant, like I was walking toward a moment I wasn't sure I was ready for. She was there when I entered the kitchen. The morning light was softer than the night had been. It spilled across the table and caught in her hair, turning it almost copper in places. She was dressed casually in a pale sweater and loose joggers, barefoot, moving easily around the kitchen as if she belonged there entirely. When she turned and saw me, she smiled, not the polite smile of yesterday, but something gentler, quieter. "Morning," she said, voice low and warm. "Morning," I echoed, pulling out a chair. She poured me coffee without asking, sliding the mug across the table, so naturally it felt like a gesture they'd done 100 times before. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but it was different, charged in a softer way than last night had been. Like we were both holding on to something fragile we didn't want to break by speaking too loudly. "You slept okay?" she asked finally. I nodded. "Yeah. You." Her lips curved just slightly, like she'd been expecting the question. Eventually, that was all she said, but the look she gave me carried more than the words, a subtle acknowledgement that we were both thinking of the same thing. The rest of breakfast passed quietly, almost tenderly. My aunt joined us halfway through, bustling around the kitchen, chatting easily, but I noticed how our eyes kept meeting in small, almost hidden glances. There was a softness there now, something unspoken but shared. At one point, when my aunt reached into a cabinet, her hand brushed mine as she passed me a plate. It was nothing, a completely casual touch, but I felt it, and she must have felt it too because her gaze lingered on mine for just a fraction of a second longer than it needed to. When breakfast was over and the kitchen was clean again, I caught her watching me as I reached for my jacket near the door. Her expression wasn't playful this time. It was thoughtful, as though she was measuring what came next, whatever that might be. And I realized I was doing the same. By late morning, it was time for me to go. My bag was already by the door, but I found myself dragging my feet, lingering over small things, rinsing my mug a second time, double-checking that I hadn't left my phone charger. She noticed, of course. "Trying to stall?" she asked softly, stepping into the hallway just as I bent to grab my shoes. I straightened, caught. "Maybe," I admitted with a half-smile. She didn't laugh this time. Instead, she glanced toward the kitchen where my aunt was still cleaning up, then back at me. "Come on," she said quietly. "Walk me out with you." Outside, the day was bright and mild, the kind of morning that felt like it might last forever if you let it. The air smelled faintly of cut grass, and somewhere a dog barked, far enough away to sound almost distant. We stood near my car for a moment, neither of us speaking. I could feel the weight of last night between us, not heavy, exactly, but present, as if it were something we were both carrying carefully. "Thank you for last night," she said finally, her voice calm but low. "For listening, for being there." "You don't have to thank me for that," I said. Her smile this time was small but real, reaching her eyes. Still, it meant something. She stepped closer then, closing the space between us until we were standing in the same patch of sunlight. I felt it warm on the back of my neck, but she was warmer still when her hands found my arms, a light, steady touch that anchored me in place. Then she hugged me. It wasn't rushed or polite. It was slow, deliberate, her arms sliding around my back and staying there. I felt the quiet press of her cheek against my shoulder, the faint rise and fall of her breathing. "Take care of yourself," she murmured, so close I felt the words against my skin. I nodded, unable to do much else. When she finally stepped back, her hands lingered a moment on my arms before she let go. "Come visit more often," she said with a faint, knowing look. "Don't let months go by again." "I won't," I promised. And I meant it. As I got into my car and started to pull away, I caught one last glimpse of her in the rearview mirror, standing in the sunlight, one hand raised in a small wave. The road ahead was empty, but my chest felt full. Not with answers, not with certainty, but with something that felt quietly alive. For the first time, I wasn't just leaving my aunt's house. I was leaving something that felt like the beginning of a story neither of us had finished telling yet.